From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. Well, here I am, ready or not. 4 minutes late. I got so engrossed in what I was doing that I quite forgot the time. I'm only half set up. Never mind, enough to get by. Welcome to Mirador Television. As you just heard, out of the Black Horse Pub, Black Horse Inn. There's one nice poster up on the wall here that goes way back. It says something like Black Horse Beer House. I rather like that. A beer house instead of a public house. Oh well. Our forefathers got some things right, didn't they? Anyway, we had a tremendous day on Mirador on Friday because I had mistakenly thought it was a public holiday. So I'd given everybody the day off. So I had to recall in a hurry, half a dozen of us, and we had a tremendous program. Some of our team are still away on holiday, especially those who appeared on a Tuesday. So a bit thin on the ground today, but we shall motor on, as indeed we should in returning from holiday. So, well, here I am, and we'll see who else appears on the small screen. Plenty happening, that's for sure. Before we go to the news headlines, I came to reality with Parkinson's over the holiday weekend. I did what I shouldn't have done. I abandoned the Red Devil, clambered onto a bus, went to Brighton, joined a long-time friend, and decided to go for lunch. Unfortunately, I had to walk a little way. And as I walked, I got worse and worse and worse until in the end, at the end of the afternoon, I hobbled to the return bus. This is a nasty, vicious disease. And no hope in sight. I'm afraid that those of us who are suffering are going to have to suffer to the end of our lives, whether that be soon or whether it be later. But if you let these things get you down, which I do from time to time, I sometimes bemoan my fate. Why can't I still be running around like some 80-year-olds? The answer is because I've got Parkinson's. And for Parkinson's, there's no cure. The medical profession are doing all that they can to try and ease the burden. In the view of some sufferers, not enough. And there are activists who do a pretty good job of raising the profile, but it is not on top of the priorities for the NHS, for the government, for anyone else for that matter. We have to suffer alone. And all we do is we ask for a bit of understanding. We can't do all that we used to. We can't keep up with the Joneses or the Smiths or the Davises or anybody else for that matter. We simply can't. And that's where we have to ask for a little bit of understanding. There's the bus. Come on, if we hurry, we catch it. We can't hurry. We're just going to have to miss it and wait for the next one. Oh, disappointment written all over the face. But nonetheless, it is a fact. It is, as they say, a truism. We just simply cannot do it. And you have to forgive us, join us, ignore it as we try to do, or just not talk about it, which doesn't help anybody. That's why I am not afraid to raise it regularly on this TV channel. We are a Parkinson's supporting channel. And I came across a delightful little fact, I suppose, towards the end of last week. And that is that there is a Parkinson's choir at the House of Friendship. So nothing would do but that I got onto my scooter, the Red Devil, roared down to the House of Friendship and said, could I speak to this lady because I'd like to interview her. And apparently, although she does marvelous things with choirs, the Parkinson's choir has become a non-starter, primarily because of the reasons that I just articulated. It's not important to anybody. It's only important to those of us who have Parkinson's. And boy, is that important. So anyway, I have the email address of this lady. Ask her to come on and chat. I shall ask what the chances are of resurrecting this choir, whether it did any good, all sorts of things. But anyway, primarily just simply because it's music. We have had on Facebook several challenges to music that we've used. Some of it goes back 4 or 5 years. Why the hell they haven't picked out, I don't know. But people have claimed and blocked our programs in certain parts of the world because they may have copyright. The thing is that there are 3 or 4 what claim to be major companies, all of whom claim the copyright. So who does have it? If they can't make up their mind, why is the onus upon us to make up their mind for them? They've got millions, if not billions of dollars, pounds to spend on such things. It hardly seems fair to me to put the onus upon us to show that we've used music that they own with copyright. It's not fair. And it's about time people who own Facebook realize where their bread is buttered. It's in the little guys like us. And we ask for nothing. Nothing. Except being treated fairly and justly and correctly. It's very upsetting to be charged with breaking copyright. And to all intents and purposes, it means that you're a thief. Well, we don't feel like thieves. We don't look like thieves. And the fact of the matter is, we are not thieves. Where justly we've made a mistake, we don't mind our programs being taken down or whatever. But we want to make sure that it's done justly and according to the facts. And that is not our responsibility. That's the people who claim ownership. And the sooner the big boys recognize that publicly, the better. Anyway, let's see what's going on in the world. I see Katie Bourne is re-elected to the job of police commissioner. I don't know. All I would say is that Katie Bourne's department suffers from the same thing as local government does right across the board, which we took up with Matthew Bird when we had him on, the mayor of Lewis, up until this week, I think. The mayor of Lewis, who we had on a couple of weeks ago, and we made the point to him, is that they don't talk. Politicians don't talk, and then they don't understand why we don't understand them. And they don't understand why we vote, because they have done an awful lot without telling us or not communicated properly. And they don't seem to care. Do you know what's happening in the country may well be coming around and spanking them in the ass? Because there is a seed change, not, in my view, a very healthy one, but a large number of Muslims have won seats in local councils, but not sitting as representative of the people, but as Muslims, using our electoral system to voice their disapproval of Israel and their own status as prominent citizens, if you like. Well, I don't mind them saying I am a Muslim councillor, but pushing their religion or way of life or ethnicity or whatever it is, that is a different kettle of fish. And particularly since most of them do it in a very ungenerous, ungrateful, and blinkered way. So on top of worrying that we may be going to war, I'm worrying that the enemy from within is beginning to establish itself. And that, as with often these things, because of groups like university students who don't know from their wet behind the ears, we don't have free thinking as such. We are subject to block views, and that is not right. It's not right at all. And I think that it's time for the authorities to step in. It's sad. It's sad to see the Britain that I knew, that despite all its ills, were reasonably fair and just, go down the tube, literally. While employing politics to further their cause. It's poor. Not only poor, it's destructive. So, if I don't support a Muslim politician, it's not because I'm anti-Muslim. It's because they are not using the office in the way that it was intended to be used. And it's about time that a few knuckles are rapped. We're out of control. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Newspaper headlines. The Times. No truce yet, says Israel. Tuesday's front pages are largely dominated by ceasefire negotiations in the ongoing Israeli-Gaza war. The Times leads with Israel saying that no ceasefire has been agreed so far. So, after Hamas The Guardian. Israeli airstrikes on Rafah begin, despite rising ceasefire pressure. The Guardian leads on Israeli airstrikes starting in the southern Gazan city of Rafah, despite increasing pressure for a ceasefire. But then why should they give in to pressure when others aren't, that are opposing them? We can never seem to establish a level playing field. The Telegraph. Netanyahu rejects Hamas ceasefire. Let's see. The Telegraph also has a story on Israel rejecting the ceasefire proposals and calling them a ruse intended to make Israel look like the side refusing a deal. The paper also reports data from Lloyds Bank, which found that Facebook and Instagram are the starting points for 1 in 50 crimes. Ooh, hadn't thought of it from that point of view. Want to become a thug? Subscribe to Facebook. Ooh. The Daily Mail. How could Greens not know about vile rant over rabbi? The Mail has a story on the Green Party facing calls to take the action against a councillor involved in an anti-Semitic row. Oh, yeah, apparently he let off steam, and it's exactly what I was talking about. He's a Green. He's meant to better our lives with his green policies. But instead, he's having a go at the Israelis. Doesn't matter whether the Israelis should have a go at them. It's the use of the position for what it was intended, for what it's being used for, that if you extend it, could lead to all sorts of situations which are of nobody's making, but nobody's solution. Express. Oh, it changes its tack. Britain is on verge of house price boom. The Express reports that Britain is on the verge of a house price boom, with costs set to soar over the next 4 years. The paper says that some experts are predicting that values could rise by as much as 20% in that time. Doesn't touch the conflict at all. Oh, except it says there's a mini heat wave on the way. Oh, that's okay. We'll buy that. The Financial Times. US boom and lower inflation set to double trade growth. Well, some good news for the States. The FT has a story on how global trade growth is due to more than double this year as inflation eases. It also reports on how fewer Londoners are now searching for houses in the countryside, or employers taking staff, and employers urging staff to go back to the office. In other words, let's be near to our work if we're going to have to go in on a daily basis. Metro. 30 missed chances to find a brain tumor. The Metro it's a story about so-called NHS incompetence. It has a story on how medical experts missed 30 chances to diagnose a brain tumor in a schoolgirl. Mirror. Molly's dad in tech plea. Our chance to save young lives. The Mirror leads with the father of Molly Russell, a 14-year-old girl who took her own life due to harmful web content. The father warns that delays to an online crackdown will cost lives. The eye. Now, this is the most positive story of the morning. Alzheimer's genetic link raises hopes of early treatment. The eye leads with a study that has found that anyone with 2 copies of the APOE4 gene has at least a 95% chance of developing Alzheimer's. The eye says that anyone with 2 copies of the APOE4 gene has at least a 95% chance of developing Alzheimer's. It reports that the genetic breakthrough raises hope that patients can be identified and treated earlier. Well, somebody who's beginning to get a bit of memory loss, all that stuff is good news. The star. What does our lovely star have to say? Well, at least it always raises a bit of a smile. Why ginger tomcats are so fierce and feisty. They had lessons in scrapping from our Norse invaders. Terror of the Viking pussies, it says. And the Star has a story on how moggy boffins say ginger tomcats have a bad attitude as they learned it from Vikings. Well, there you are. When you see a ginger cat, remember that it has taken advice, or it's got genes from Vikings who were apparently aggressive and not very nice people. Certainly that's the way they're portrayed in film and drama. Is it true? I don't know. It'd be worth finding out from an expert, wouldn't it? Were Vikings as aggressive as they thought? Just giving a bit of depth to those front pages. The war in Gaza dominates Tuesday's front pages. Netanyahu rejects Hamas ceasefire is the headline on the Daily Telegraph. The photo on the front of the Times shows a convoy of cars leaving Rafah with people's belongings on top. They are driving past badly damaged and blackened buildings. The Daily Mirror's editorial says Israel's allies, including the UK, cannot look idly on as Benjamin Netanyahu attacks Rafah. UK Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, writing in the Telegraph, says she is meeting a group of vice-chancellors this week to make it clear the government expects university leaders to secure the safety and well-being of Jewish staff and students. Protests about the Gaza war have sprung up on campuses. Yeah, what a waste of... Get on with learning. Ms. Keegan writes of an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitic abuse, saying the government will work with universities to make sure they're not torn apart by hatred, racism, or violence. Hear, hear. The eye has news of what it calls a genetic breakthrough, which has raised hopes that Alzheimer's patients could receive earlier treatment. It says scientists have found a way of identifying people who have a 95% chance of developing the disease. The Daily Mail quotes a scientific researcher as saying the findings are so significant they represent a reconceptualization of the disease. The Times says genetic testing may become key for the diagnosis and treatment of the condition. The Daily Express carries a study from Age UK, which warns that thousands of vulnerable pensioners are at risk of being taken into care against their wishes, because 2/3 of local authorities are taking longer than recommended, 6 months, to adapt council housing. Writing in the paper, the director of Age UK, Caroline Abrahams, says that sometimes delays are so long that the requested adaptations to housing are no longer required because of the failing health of the person who's asked for it. The Financial Times repeats forecasts that global trade growth is set to more than double. Doner kebabs have become a political issue in Germany, according to the Telegraph. It says, well, that's the news as we see it on this return to work day. Here we return to work. I've got an entire pub to myself. Ooh! Let's see. Now the weather is looking rather better. It's going to be 17 degrees today, sunny intervals, and a gentle breeze. Tomorrow, it is going to be more or less the same. But then Thursday, it's going to rise to 18 degrees and full sunshine. And Friday, 20 degrees and full sunshine. And Saturday, a slight drop in temperature. Or is it? No, hang on. There's so many figures floating around. You have to make sure you get the right one. Let's see. Saturday is going to hit 20, and Sunday, and lots. We're going to be in for a gorgeous weekend before it starts to rain again next week. Oh well, never mind. We're going to have just a few days of decent weather, and on our days off, on our theoretical days off. Well, that's the weather, and that's the news headlines. Wait a minute. Yes. Apart from this politicization, I suppose it's nonsense to say politicization of local councils. Of course, they're politics. They shouldn't be. Party politics are best left to Westminster, not to local councils. You can see what happens when a perfectly harmless situation appears harmless, and that is that you get a whole raft of Muslim councillors, but they can't stop using their success, their victory, which we all wish them well in achieving and using, they can't stop suddenly using it to have a go at Israel. And that is not what you're there for. And stop it. Keep your bloody mouth shut. Get on with trying to make life better for us. Believe me, as a Parkinson's sufferer, I look to those who can make life better for me. And I get to be a pretty demanding old sod, too. Never was. Ooh, but I am now. And as a consequence, I can get very critical of the people who are in charge of our governance. And they, in turn, had better smarten up too. All of them. Not just the new Muslim councillors. We have a long way to go before we can really call ourselves truly civilized. And instead of finding reasons not to do things, which we do, let's find things. Yes, things. Yeah. Yeah. We better move on, hadn't we? It's so well, it's not gloomy as far as the weather is concerned. It's cloud. It's quite pleasant. But it's gloomy in terms of what we are doing to ourselves. And you can only take a small dart of that before you start to get gloomy. I've got every reason to be gloomy. But I'll be damned if I'm going to be. Yeah, see the smile? Yes. We have to actually, laughter is the best medicine for all illness, including mental. I know. Believe me, there were moments this morning when I once again tried to get my trousers on and they resisted from every angle. And I thought, how on earth can you be positive? How can you smile? How can you feel happy? Giggle. I have my moments. But overall, it's being so cheerful that keeps me going, as Mrs. Malaprop would have said. Or was it Mona Lot? In the famous Itmar series that ran during the war. Fabulous radio series it was. We didn't have television in those days. Wow. What did we do without it? Well, a lot better, actually. We made a lot more of our own fun. And looking back on my life as a little boy, I so enjoyed myself. It is now 9:15, by the way, and I just said a nice day. What I'm going to do now is, if I can, I'm going to play episode 7 of our documentary because we have been playing it in bits and pieces. Well, no, a chapter at a time. There are 8 chapters. We are up to number 7. So let's do that right now. And it'll give me a chance to catch my breath. I was up at 5 this morning in order to be here in plenty of time. I was here in plenty of time. I got stuck into doing something, and it was 3 minutes past 8 before we went on the air. Oh, dear. Here we go. Episode 7 of The Bloody Past of a Tiny Town. We didn't win any awards because we didn't put it in for any awards, but our accepted documentary about Lewis, The Bloody Past of a Tiny Town, episode 7. In the centre of Lewis is a war memorial, a monument to the dead of 2 world wars. It's the centre of the huge bonfire celebrations in Lewis on November the 5th. And of course, Remembrance Day services at various times of the year. But it also sits in the middle of an old square, which was surrounded by inns and hotels, the centre of social life in the town over almost 6 centuries. The White Hart we've already talked about, but the Crown and the Star both have fascinating histories. The Star Inn was a luxurious hotel used by royalty and gentry from the 14th century, when it was an inn owned by the Southover Priory. Parts of it are still there, disguised now as Lewis Town Hall. The inn was originally used to shelter pilgrims travelling to either Canterbury or Chichester, but it soon outgrew its clientele, and especially after the priory was torn down. In the 16th century, it started to get a reputation for its fine cuisine. By the mid-1600s, bishops and poets were praising it for its food and wine. There was, of course, the Black Spot in the time of Queen Anne, when the cellars were used as dungeons to hold some of the martyrs as prisoners, as they waited to be burned at the stake. By the mid-1700s, it was the scene of social gaiety. A monthly supper and ball were held each month throughout the winter, and the Prince Regent used it to hold dinner parties after attending the Lewis races. It is also said the Prince used it for other purposes, meeting young ladies there incognito, presumably for affairs of the heart. In the late 1800s, its clientele had changed, and it was the farm owners who held sway. Their weekly market luncheons were used for heavy social activity until eventually the premises were bought by Lewis Council. They turned it into a town hall late in the 19th century, and this it still is. But the changes have been considerable, and the present town hall is barely recognisable from the outside as the great inn which housed the social elite of Lewis. But the town hall is still a centre of social life, used for parties and dinner dances, and important civic events, such as the exhibition featuring the Rodin statue, The Kiss. Once banned from Lewis, but welcomed back with open arms for a brief stay. The Crown Hotel is almost next door and is still extant. Although it has struggled recently to achieve former glories, it was built in the reign of Charles I and was originally called the Black Lion. It changed its name to the Crown in 1790, and the Crown it has remained until this day. In its better years, it received visits from royalty, King George IV, and there is no suggestion that he was with a young lady. There is a little bit of modern history, though, to add to the Crown. When I first came to Lewis, there was a chap called Tony Burton here who befriended me. Tony took out the tenancy of the Crown Inn after a life of travelling around the world. He installed a grand piano in the bar area and played it to laughter and gaiety throughout the 80s, and he attracted a whole range of entertainers to join him. Those glory days have gone. Ownership of the Star Inn and of many properties around Lewes showed the power and the wealth of the priory. When Henry VIII had the priory pulled down, his hatchet man, Thomas Cromwell, grabbed a mansion house nearby, which had been owned by the priory. But he didn't own it until his power had started to slip. Anne of Cleves led to the downfall of Thomas Cromwell from almost unprecedented heights of power. He was the king's favourite, and why not? He'd masterminded Henry's break with Rome. But he also masterminded his marriage to Anne. She turned out to be anything other than a beauty, and Henry never forgave his friend for arranging the marriage. The king had the marriage annulled after 6 months, on the grounds it had not been consummated. Anne's looks are historically the reason given for why the king couldn't make love to her. Cromwell took the blame, and as he slipped from power, his enemies closed in. He was eventually imprisoned in the Tower and beheaded. He added, in a distant sort of way, to the bloody Lewes tag. The executioner took 3 shots at trying to behead him. Anne of Cleves was granted this 15th century house bearing her name in Lewes when her marriage to Henry VIII was annulled in 1541. It was on the 16th of February 1538 that Lewes Priory was given to Thomas Cromwell, who was then Keeper of the Privy Seal. He immediately set about converting part of the prior's lodgings as a home for his son Gregory.
At the dissolution of the monasteries, Thomas Cromwell, who was Henry's chief advisor, had his beady eye on the land of Lewes Priory, as it was one of the richest and largest priories in the country. Now, he also wanted to set up a household in this area, and in fact his son Gregory lived in the what was latterly known as the Lord's Place across the road. It was the old prior's lodgings. But he certainly became Lord of the Manor of Southover when he got all the Lewes Priory lands off of the priory. Well, the priory was closed down and demolished, and they did a pretty good job of that by banging posts underneath the foundations and setting fire to them to bring that down. So, as I say, Cromwell's had this as part of his portfolio of properties. So he sent Holbein out to the famous picture, which we've got a copy out in the hall there, to do paintings of possible, which included Christine of Denmark, but also Anne of Cleves and her sister. Henry liked the picture, so said, right, okay, we'll go ahead with it. You know, I suppose it was a bit of a like online dating in Tudor times. The painting was supposed to be a fairly good likeness of her. She has got fairly heavy eyelids. She tended to wear the heavy German style of clothes, which wasn't the sort of flighty sort of stuff, French stuff that Anne Boleyn and the likes would have worn. She was very pragmatic, in as much as she agreed to the annulment of the wedding, and because of that, and you know, I don't know, it's been a bit of a long, circuitous way of getting around to it. To answer your question, the house here became part of the annulment settlement.
Right.
The manor of Southover was one of 9 manors that she got in Sussex. She also, and by manor, we're not just talking about this house and the gardens around it. It's all the land that was providing for. So this was one of 9 manors in Sussex. She had another 9 in Essex. She was welcome at court. She got on well with Henry and Mary and Elizabeth, his 2 daughters as well. She actually outlived all the other wives, and she's the only one buried in Westminster Abbey. At Anne's death, it reverted to the crown, and it went through a number of hands. Most notably was the Saxby family, who did a lot of the alterations to the house. So the original house would have been the footprint that you see from the road. So in fact, the bit that we've got now is the Iron Gallery and the Lewes Room was an old malt house. And eventually Frank Verrill, who owned it was on the council, so, and was involved heavily with the Sussex Archaeological Society, presented it to the Society in 1925, and it's been a museum ever since then.
Not much later, in 1603, one of the oldest monuments to Lewis' life began existence. A local lawyer, John Rowe, gifted a piece of land to the town. It was much later that the town worthies decided to put it to use. They created Pell's Pool, a public swimming bath, drawing the water from the spring under the land. The water still comes from that source to this day. The cost of the project in the mid-1800s was £442, 5 shillings and sixpence, raised by public subscription. The name Pell's comes from an ancient word meaning pools. Again, it was the priory that influenced this development. There was a series of pools nearby before even the Romans came to Britain. The Normans transformed these pools into fish ponds, and the priory monks used them to rear swans, providing feathers for their quilts. They later drained the area to create water meadows, which included a paper mill. Locals would swim in the mill pond, and so a tradition of swimming was established in the area, resulting in the present-day swimming pool, the oldest freshwater swimming pool in Britain. But water has not always been a friend to Lewis. Whenever I have talked about attacks on Lewis, it has been either fire, wars, or plague. But there was one enemy which had formerly been a friend throughout its history: water. Back in a moment, but for once not a visit to the pub, but a reflection on the power of water. Lewis has always been subject to flooding, but the worst attack was in modern times, in fact, in the year 2000. The flooding was as serious as it was unexpected. 3 days of exceptionally heavy rain caused the River Ouse to spill over the top of its flood defences. South over, the area near to the Priory flooded first. But the worst of the deluge swept into the town centre at about 9 o'clock that night. I don't normally like to give what I call a shopping list of facts and figures, but the devastation was as severe as when the French raided the town in the 16th century. Almost 900 properties were flooded, over 500 vehicles were wrecked, and the total cost came to £90 million. More than 1,000 people were displaced. The town was cut in half for 3 days. But the true spirit of Louisians was put on show that night. Homes were opened to the displaced. Elbow grease took over, and the task of repairing the town began almost immediately. The long-term effects were felt for months, even years afterwards. Another bloody chapter in the history of the town. Lewis is a town of little theatre, opera companies, bands and musical societies. The people get on with entertaining themselves. So when cinema disappeared from the high street in 1961, it was barely noticed. Nostalgia, yes, but mourning, no. The townsfolk got cracking, and films were shown in a local abandoned church and the little theatre premises. A local radio station gave limited broadcasts for the week of Bonfire, and another week for a now-defunct Lewis Festival in 1997. Radio K-Burn evolved into Rocket Radio, a broadcaster still going strong, when the bonfire marches begin in November. Then, as if by magic, with the development of blockbuster movies and multi-screen cinemas, The last picture show became the first. A new 3-screen cinema opens its doors. But as you've heard me say several times in this series, this is Lewis, and nothing is ever what it seems. Guess where the cinema is located? No, not quite in one of the 63 pubs, but you're close. In an old storage warehouse owned by Harvey's Brewery. It could only happen in Lewis. Tarantara! Quite wonderful, quite appropriate. Lewis is full of nostalgia, and previously I have told you about the importance of horse racing to Lewis. But equally, it is a railway town, and the railway has had a profound effect on the history of Lewis. The advent of the railway caused one death and one rebirth of important elements of Lewis the town. When it first came in 1844, the Brighton, Lewis and Hastings Railway gave a new means of trading to Lewis. The port had seen a huge amount of activity as the foundations of the new railway lines demanded clay. The barge owners were only too happy to oblige, and their vessels sailed back and forth up the Ouse, bringing load after load. But there is no sentiment in business, as they say. And the railway quickly took over the haulage business once enjoyed by the ships sailing on the Ouse. Slowly, shipping declined, and so did the port. Lewis became an increasingly important railway hub, serving the coastal towns of Sussex as well as London and the nearby town of Uckfield. That line no longer exists, but as with all things lost in Lewis, there are serious attempts to get it reopened. While it caused the decline of the port, it was the saviour of the racecourse. Crowds had rapidly declined after royalty had ceased to favour the track, and transport proved difficult. But the trains gave easy access to Lewis, and the course flourished again. The recording of those races is almost as old as I am. I can remember as a little boy standing on the platform scribbling down numbers as trains belching fire and smoke roared by. Well, those days have gone, but the importance of the routes emanating from Lewes have not. They are key transport systems linking the ports, major towns and the capital city with a ribbon of rail track, reaching out across the country, carrying people and goods. But the original network was much more ambitious than this. Trains have always been important to Lewes. And so, let me use the phrase again, this is Lewes and nostalgia reigns. Around the country, steam enthusiasts have saved miles of track and hundreds of steam engines for posterity. Lewes has done its bit by keeping the Bluebell Railway. The Bluebell, or to give it its proper name, the Lewes and East Grinstead Railway, ran between the two towns from 1877. It had 5 stations, but all of them were rural. The reason was that the railway was built to run near its benefactor, Lord Sheffield's estate, almost entirely for his own convenience. It recorded that the entire touring Australian cricket team on one occasion was taken to his lordship's residence to play against the Sussex team. Now it's a showpiece of steam trains and puffer engines, clanking along its original route, carrying passengers and goods through wonderful scenery, from Lewes to the old coaching stop of East Grinstead. Nostalgia. Time to say ta-ta again, but tonight, not to a pub, but in a cloud of steam.